Mandy?
Joe Gordon.
Thanks, Mandy. And Lead Councillor Fiona Cross is unwell, so send her apologies too. Which brings us on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Anything we need to declare here, Debbie?
Thank you, Leader. I've given advice to members. I'm not aware of any interest to declare in relation to any of these items on the agenda, but as is the usual case, my advice would be that if you ask any questions or enter into a debate in relation to an item on the agenda, then you can consider whether you have an interest to declare at that particular time. Thank you, Leader.
Peter?
Can I, Delith, you did suggest that for item 10, the Shared Prosperity Fund, if there had been any sort of consultation with outside bodies, there have been some discussions with the community councils regarding that. So it's safer, I think, for us community councillors to declare a personal interest.
Yes, I did give advice, and if you are a member of a community council, then my advice would be to declare a personal interest in relation to that item as a consultee.
Yeah, I'll declare a personal interest in it.
The same for me, please. Thank you.
Can I just ask which community council? Thank you.
Cumbran.
Cumbran.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks all. Okay, if we move on then to item number 4, which is the confirmation of the minutes from the 18th of October. Everyone happy with those? Anything anyone wants to raise under those minutes? If not, we'll move on to item number 5, updates on actions. Anything we need to note here? Any changes to that? No. Item number 6 then is council tax base. I'll bring in Sue initially.
Thank you, Leader. So this item really just seeks approval for the tax base for 2023-24. It's happening in accordance with our normal timescales, and this is a report members will be familiar with. The key messages for this year are that our absolute collection rate assumption is going to remain at 98%. I believe this was reduced during COVID, but there's no expectation in the current economic climate that we would be able to increase that assumption. So 98% it will remain. Our overall Band D tax base has increased by 100 properties on last year's estimate. So from 34,147 Band D properties up to 34,247. That's taking into account both the estimated number of new properties at 190 and the 90 that we've had to take out of the base due to an increased level of exemptions. And just a couple of words around those. The causes for that increase in the level of exemptions. We're seeing an unusual level of delays in the completion of probate, much of it to do with the delivery of the service, but some apparently to do with people's reluctance to move for probate, which may be during the period of climbing property prices. It's uncertain what the cause behind that is, but it's been linked to people just hanging on, waiting for property prices to go up. We currently also have 362 properties which have been empty for more than 6 months and so qualify for that exemption. I think the key point to stress for this report is that we're going to continue to apply the same discounts for 2023-24 as we currently do. And I think that is a really important message, that certainty helps people plan, which helps them cope. So by keeping to the same discounts for the next year, we're giving people that assurance. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Nigel, do you want to add?
No, Leader, I don't think there's anything I can add to the executive member's introduction.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, colleagues? Are we happy then to move to the recommendations at 7.1 on page 22 of the agenda today? And have a show of hands on those. Everyone in favour? Great, that's carried. Thank you both. Okay, if we then move on to agenda item 7, which is the financial monitoring and revenue budget 23-24.
Thank you, Leader. This is me again. Just in terms of the key messages that we can draw out of this very full and detailed report, for which I thank officers. Again, an awful lot of work goes into the preparation of these figures. Just to say that our in-year forecast, dealing first of all with this year, presents a slightly improved position to the Q1 based report, which in itself was a positive position. I just want to stress that, not to gloat, but very few councils aren't heading for an overspend this year, and I think while it's a small underspend, I think to be in that position is a fortunate one, relatively speaking, in the current climate. That's not to say that we don't have pressures in parts of the budget, and pressures continue to exist in the Economy and Environment Service, which we've discussed at some length previously, and again in Children's Social Care Service, where the extreme costs of placements, residential placements, continues to be a real pressure, which despite our reductions in overall numbers of children looked after, continues to be a difficult one to manage. As you're aware, moving to the 23-24 estimates, these initial estimates have been prepared and presented a shortfall. And once the levels of funding that we then believed were heading our way for 23-24 were taken into account, I'm sure you'll all be familiar with that figure of a projected funding gap existing in the region of 12.5 million. So that continues to be the case. However, the provisional funding settlement from Welsh Government should be received mid-December. You'll have seen the autumn statement as well as I, and we'll certainly be lobbying really hard to see whether an element of that additional funding for Welsh Government will be passported to local authorities and to Torfaen in particular, and making our case for that. So there is that possibility of some scope for an increase in that settlement, but it remains to be seen. In terms of our projected council tax increase, we are, as committed, heading for a 1.95% increase. And again, that commitment made in March 22 is there to provide some certainty to our residents at a time when certainty is really thin on the ground. And as I've said before, and I keep saying, certainty helps people plan, which helps them cope. So I'm very pleased that we're able to continue in line with that projected modest council tax increase. We understand again that we're one of a very small number of councils able to offer certainty at this point, assurance about levels, or to increase to a level below 3%. Again, I think the calm, measured, balanced approach that we take to managing our finances and to the staff and the leadership of Nigel and their approach to meticulous, careful, detailed planning really is helping us to go into what is undoubtedly a dreadful economic crisis with at least that sort of calm of knowing where we are, knowing where we're headed, and we will stay calm and we will bring in a balanced budget. So recommend to colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Nigel?
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Sue. Yeah, just a few, a few points. I mean, the report does articulate where the variances are in 2022-23, and as the executive member has said, we do seem to be in a more favourable position than the majority of authorities are reporting. I suspect towards the end of the year, more will come in, and the variances are there. Where I think we are different is we were able to fund pay in 22-23 on a recurring basis because of the decisions you took as members as part of this year's budget. I do think that is that's helping us in the current year, and it helps us going forward because we don't have that recurring problem to find. We were at a session last Friday of all local authorities in Wales, and I think we were quite unusual in that, in that position. It seemed to me. There is a little table there in terms of financial standing that just shows our current level of reserves. It doesn't take into account any movements as a result of the forecast, and then there is a detailed appendix. Just to cite members, as we move through this budget, I'm going to be recommending that we have a review of our reserves in terms of are they all appropriate now for their original intention, or given that the financial headwinds we are facing, as are all local authorities, is there a better grouping of reserves? That's not us taking the reserves away, it's just saying, are they all appropriate for how they're listed at the moment? In terms of the initial estimates, I mean, it's now well known that we've got a gap of 12.5 million, based on the assumption of 3.5% from Welsh Government and council tax of 1.95%, and the assumptions are there. I don't think we're out of line in our assumptions, although things will move and change as we proceed through the estimates. In terms of how we're approaching it, and this is what we also reported to scrutiny, which have also had a look at a very similar report, is rather than just percentage reductions arbitrarily across services, we're working on a range of themes, cutting right across the council, with programmes of work being led by the Chief Executive to deliver the savings. We're also continuing to challenge all the estimates and see whether there are tactical reductions we can make, because the plan is to balance as much as we can of the 24-25 position as well as the 23-24 position once we have the revived MTFP, so that we can actually drive through and get greater financial resilience for the new position we're in. We had a good financial resilience last March, but the world has shifted, so get greater financial resilience moving forward. So, I mean, we're in a reasonable place in terms of our process. We've got good information, we've got good budgets, and as always with Torfaen, we have a very corporate approach to the way we approach these issues. We don't have any silos going on, around the council, and we'll take a collective approach to it. And as the executive member says, we will get to a balanced position by the council on the 28th of February. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you both. Any questions, colleagues? I think it's always interesting when the first half of the report, looking at the forecasts. I think the way that we sort of put forecasts together, I think is sometimes misunderstood or not understood. These are, of course, just forecasts. It doesn't mean there's spare cash lying around. It's just where we forecast to be. And I think they had to be viewed within the context of a budget of over £200 million. So I think it's great that we're within sort of 0.5% of where we thought we'd be. But that doesn't mean there's 0.5% of money just lying around somewhere. That's a forecast, and things can change between now and the end of the year, of course. So it's good to have a little cushion there. It's much better, of course, than being overspent. I think reserves is the other thing that gets misunderstood in the context of our budget, where a reserve of a few £1 million might sound like a lot of money, but in the context of a budget of over £200 million a year, it's actually a very small amount of money in the wider scheme of things. As regards to 23-24, I think the risks at paragraph 6 are very apparent to me this year. There's as much uncertainty as there's ever been about things going forward. Things like pay, for example. That's a risk going forward that we have to consider. I think the next steps at 7.1 are the thing that interests me, really. I very much share the comments that Sue has mentioned, sort of welcoming the sort of calm, measured approach, welcoming the corporate approach, which means we deal with things together rather than, in a silo mentality or trying to salami slice things. That's an important way to do things. I don't think that makes it easy, though. So I think it is important we map out the next steps. I think there's dangers in going too early with things in a situation like this, and that you presume the worst and cause things to be in danger that don't need to be. But of course we need to pace things appropriately so that we can bring in the budget in a balanced way. So I welcome the approach that's being taken there. Of course that doesn't make things easy, and I think it's important that we say that at a difficult time. All all the planning and all the sound financial management in the world don't make a position easy when there's growing demand, pressures on things like energy costs and pay, and a lack of money coming in to meet those pressures. I think it's a very difficult position for councils across the UK. I think we're in a better position in Wales, partly because we've got a government that will talk to us about these pressures and will work with us to try and meet them. And I think that's invaluable. But again, that doesn't make it easy when there's a lack of money in the system. I think the future of key services is something that needs to be discussed nationally, not just locally. How we continue to invest in services that do have an early intervention and prevention role. The temptation in such times is to contract back into acute services, of course, but then you wonder why in 10 years' time there's even more pressure on those acute services because you've not invested in the community things and the preventative things that stop those services being overburdened, services like social care in the first place. So it's a difficult position for all local authorities, I think, and I just repeat the request to central government really to think about the implications of their resourcing decisions on the services that people value and that people rely on. Councils aren't just bureaucracies. We, at the end of the day, deliver services that transform people's lives and that keep people either independent or living at home, teach children, keep our communities going, and preserve our local environments. And if the future of funding of those sort of things is at danger, then we'll all pay for it. Is everyone okay to move on to the recommendations then? Paragraph 10. It's recommended that the current notes the current financial forecasts, the current 23-24 estimate position, the proposed next steps, and also notes the timetable for the remainder of the 23-24 budget cycle. Is everyone content? Right, that's carried. Thank you both. On to procurement strategy, and over to Sue.
Thank you, Leader. I think in just the same way as the importance of continuing to emphasise preventative services, I think it's really important that we grasp the breadth of the procurement portfolio and procurement strategy. While the temptation might be to focus just on cost and just on cheapest is best, we need to realise that to think wide is to think clever, and that we can realise so many of our benefits and so many of the objectives we're seeking for our communities, particularly in difficult times, through broad, comprehensive, well thought through procurement approaches. So while this topic might feel a little dry, I think it's actually crucial. Contributing to our aim to be a carbon neutral council by 2030, again we've seen with an energy crisis that bearing down on energy and usage is actually really good financial sense, as well as being the right thing for our future and for future generations. Making procurement spend more accessible to local small businesses. We know that businesses from shops to retailing all across the board to hospitality. I was just reading this week the numbers of small hospitality businesses that are closing in the current climate. Our local small businesses need us, and so this procurement strategy has a really important role in supporting them and in supporting our third sector bodies who are also squeaking under the strain of the financial pressures. The third one is very dear to my heart, the principle of improving fair working practices by our suppliers. Contracting gives us the opportunity to have an influence on how the private sector companies, which we need to supply our services, are treating their staff. And I think that's a really important issue, and I would go further to say that particularly in social care, that is a very important issue for us. And our procurement strategy gives us some levers there too. Increasing community benefits and social value, securing value for money, of course, and managing demand. Ensuring legal compliance and transparent governance, these are all really important. But I'd finish by stressing the opportunity for procurement strategy to help us promote innovation and best practice solutions. I think we have to think clever. We have to be looking at how we can do things differently in this current climate, and the procurement strategy is a route into that. It's a draft strategy at the moment. It's still there for shaping. And I would remind members that our procurement service is benefiting from a partnership with Cardiff Council's larger scale operations, but that nonetheless this strategy is tailored to Torfaen's policy objectives and to our county plan. And I'm very grateful that Steve Robinson, Head of Procurement at Cardiff City and County Council, is with us today. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks, Sue, and thanks to Peter and Steve for joining us in Cabinet today. Very much welcome that mention of value for money in a broad sense, bringing in those environmental, fair work and local economy and small business considerations too. Anything you want to add, Peter or Steve?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk today. Executive members obviously quite, succinctly taken us through the key 7 objectives that we've structured the strategy around. That was from the very first time we started to work with Torfaen. We kind of really wanted to get a sense of what were the things that really mattered to you, and I think that was something we were able to agree very early, which has given us something then to build on. What we were also able to do, which we think was really positive, was actually agree the 7 core objectives across the 3 authorities we work with, so Cardiff, Monmouthshire and Torfaen. But as the exec member said, to make sure that each strategy, though, still has that clear line of sight to the priorities for each individual local authority. What we didn't want this is to be, we were just going to take something from Cardiff and just, assume that would be the natural default. So we very much look to ensure that it really clearly aligns to the Torfaen priorities, and obviously with your new community plan coming through, then we've been able to reflect that. Just to say, the strategy is deliberately intended to be fairly high level. We've tried to position the strategy so that it will run through to 2027. Obviously, what we would hope is there will be a lot of progress in delivery against the strategy. And so what we've developed in conjunction with the strategy is, and we've got a good solid first draft of that now, is a detailed delivery plan. And that will set out the detailed activity that we will do to support the delivery of each of those objectives. But the other key point will be that even with the new partnership we have, we've still got limited resources. So what's going to be key and crucial to this is working with other services within the authority to support us through the delivery. So, I think, and so really once the strategy is approved, the key kind of next step for us will be to work with the key services we've already identified and to work through the detail that sits behind that delivery plan to support us going forward and to obviously agree the prioritisation of work there.
Thank you. Peter, do you want to add anything to the report? Okay. Thank you. Any questions, colleagues? No, it's good to see that partnership approach. As you say, it doesn't, solve the problem. It just makes us better equipped to tackle it. Yeah. And very much echo those views about the policy objectives that we have in this area, as Sue and mentioned earlier. Okay. Recommendations then are at paragraph 6. It's recommended that we approve the draft socially responsible procurement strategy 2022 to 27. Everyone in favour? That's carried, and thank you all for that report. That brings us then to agenda item 9, which is the cost of living support report. And if I initially bring in Dave Leach to talk about this one, then I'll come in afterwards. That's okay, Dave.
Yes, thank you, Leader. So the report before you today on cost of living support, this is the 3rd report that we've brought through now on this topic. The first 2 in June and July this year were to allocate the funding, and this is the first time now that we're reporting in terms of progress on that funding. Just by way of a quick recap, the allocation in total was just over £6 million for cost of living support in Torfaen. £5 million of which was delivered through something called the main scheme, which was essentially funding support through the council tax system to those in bands A to D. and £855,000, which was the discretionary scheme, which the authority had a degree of choice over how it would be allocated. And the key focal point for those schemes from Welsh Government was about how we can get immediate support out to households, partly to help households recovering from the pandemic and partly to mitigate some of those early pressures coming through in terms of cost of living. In terms of the allocations that were made, members previously looked to allocate around about 40,000 to those who missed out on the main A to D council tax banding system because they were in an exempt group. Around £400,000 for those who were in receipt of free school meals, and £200,000 to support advisory and additional advisory services that the Community Resilience Group members, so the third sector in Torfaen, provide. In addition, then, there was a further £84,000 to support those on community meals and £134,000 worth of additional energy support, working with Citizens Advice Bureau. Of the funds that were allocated now, the majority has now been claimed. So just shy of £5 million from the main scheme has now been claimed. That's been 33,146 payments that have been claimed, leaving a balance of about 141,000 left to claim on the main scheme. So what will happen now, if the proposals in front of you today are accepted, is that that balance will be put into the discretionary fund, which will then allow us to essentially assign that to the individual council tax accounts of those who haven't yet claimed. Those who haven't yet claimed then will be able to approach us to claim that funding. If not, it will be deducted then from council tax payments, so there will be that direct element of paying to those who haven't yet claimed it. We'd encourage everyone to come forward if they haven't claimed from within those bands, and we'll be making more support available to do that. On the exemption side, there is a total of 39,850, as I say, that was allocated. There's about 18,000 of that that's unclaimed. We're working through our employability and social care teams now to try and notify households where claims haven't been made yet for that support. The free school meal allocation has almost entirely been claimed. £360,000 of that has now been claimed, leaving a balance of just over £33,000. Should that not be required as a contingency, then one of the proposals and recommendations in front of you today is to use that to support additional discretionary housing payments. And finally, on the community meals, again, £84,000 was allocated to support that. 20,000 of that has been claimed for the August and September dates. Obviously, that's a lot lower than the other areas so far, but that's just because that scheme came on a little bit later than the others. We're still anticipating the full amount to be claimed by end of February for that scheme. The energy support has now been issued out to Citizens Advice, so that is now being made available to residents at Torfaen on the basis of an income and expenditure assessment. And the additional support has now been made available to residents as well through financial inclusion and income support officers with Citizens Advice Bureau. So in terms of the recommendations, as I say, the full balance is getting very close to being spent now. We're recommending that any balance from the main fund is allocated via the discretionary fund to residents' council tax accounts. There's an allocation of 6,200 from the underspending free school meals to discretionary support, and that the remaining balance, assuming it's not needed as a contingency, of 27,400 is allocated to discretionary housing payments. One other point for me, just to point out that I know has been considered before, there was in the Community Resilience Group amount a £30,000 towards energy payments. So members may see that showing up twice. That doesn't mean that we've double counted it in terms of the figures. It's just the way that the report's been written.
Great. Thank you, Dave. I very much welcome that report. Our commitment as a council at the outset of what has become a cost of living crisis is very much that we don't want to be the kind of council that walks on by while people suffer. And I know that does create a lot of extra work for officers. I'd like to thank you and also Deb and her team for the amount of support they've managed to get out to people. It's, you know, some of the statistics you mentioned there, 33,000 payments of £5 million, plus the discretionary amounts. plus, of course, the huge support during the pandemic, as well as both the schemes in the summer and the winter fuel Welsh Government scheme as well. That's money in people's pockets thanks to the hard work of those officers behind the scenes. So I think we all want to extend our thanks to them for the hard work, because I bet every time some of us politicians open our mouths and start talking about helping people, they probably think, oh, that's another wave of work that's going to come across our desks. So we do appreciate that, because these payments don't just happen as if by magic. It relies on the hard work of those officers. Very much agree with the focus of that delivery scheme, and the discretionary scheme, I should say, sorry, and welcome that report back about how that money's been claimed. That targeting of support at families with children and free school meals, I think was the right priority. Looking at the demographics of the cost of living crisis, and how especially young families and those in need are suffering ever more. One of the other dynamics of the cost of living crisis, of course, is that people who haven't previously struggled are suffering from rising bills, rent, energy prices. I'd love to be in a position where we could help everyone, but of course we can't. I think that's why it's important that we've also focused some support on those advice services. And I would say, to anyone listening into this, please don't suffer in silence. If you are struggling financially, then there are sources of advice you can go to. One partnership you mentioned there was the Citizens Advice Bureau. They give great advice and support, but our financial inclusion teams and our benefits advice teams as well, I know, are more than happy to speak to people to see what kind of help we can offer. We can't solve every problem, but what we can do is trying to advise people to get them through a difficult time in their personal finances, because I know it's a difficult time for everyone now. Quite often, sometimes the debate on when we do give discretionary support is where we can't offer that support to. But that doesn't mean I don't think that we should do all we can to support those who are having particular difficulties at the moment. So just a thank you to all the officers who've been at work on that. As far as I can see from the report, all the reallocation sounds very logical to me. Any of those small unclaimed amounts, if we can't get them to people, I think putting that into the discretionary support scheme is the right thing to do. Any questions, colleagues, on the contents of the report? Are we okay then to move to the recommendations that are at paragraph 8? It's recommended that we note any balances from the main fund to be allocated to residents' council tax accounts as set out in 4.15. That's where people haven't claimed it yet. We can allocate it to their council tax accounts. As Dave said, we've tried direct payments. We've tried payments via the post office, but where those don't work, there's a fallback position. Secondly, that we agree to allocate the £6,200 from the underspending free school meals discretionary support to the council tax exemptions discretionary support as set out in 4.2.3. And lastly, that we agree that any remaining balances, estimated £27,400, will be allocated to discretionary housing payments and the scheme that we very successfully run there to help people currently facing pressures on their bills and their housing situations. As a key preventative fund to stop homelessness, which obviously causes a great deal of suffering and also causes public services a great deal of spending too. Is everyone happy with those three recommendations? Yep, that's carried then. Thank you, Dave, for the reports. If we then move on to the report on the Shared Prosperity Fund, I think Richard's going to kick off this conversation.
Thanks, Ada. The Shared Prosperity Fund is meant to replace EU funds post-Brexit. I don't think it'll cover the EU funds we've received in the past, but it's supposed to cushion the blow in any event. This came before Cabinet in July of this year, where the broad principles were set out and a great scramble for a August deadline, not imposed by ourselves but others. And I do congratulate the team in getting this over the line. I'm sure it was no mean feat. Following the Cabinet discussion, other regional organisations and people providing services in our area suddenly realised that this was the game in town without the reduction in EU funding coming to an end for them. And I think we got up to about 28 different projects coming before us, which was clearly unsustainable for the amount of money allocated to Torfaen. Again, congratulations to the officers because they worked hard to redirect some of those to a regional level with regional themes and taking forward some 16 projects of our own which are listed in the draft plan. Again, in that great juggling act to get down to 16, the team had to understand and comprehend 53 interventions wanted by national government, 11 missions and 3 themed areas, as well as bringing that into Wales and reflections on the 9 wellbeing objectives and even future-proofing it within Torfaen and bringing it into line with our county plan. And those are the 9 wellbeing objections, the regional ones being 7. Sorry, I got my figures wrong the wrong way round. The project outcomes and impacts are listed in 4.4 of the report. This isn't exhaustive and they do go into greater detail in the plan itself. But to ensure that, we do need a team who have the skills and expertise to look at the outcomes and to manage this project for us within the authority itself. And part of the report will look at approving a 4% slice of the money to fund this. RCT will be responsible for the regional element of the plan, and the report references a legal framework that will be pinned on, and then similarly for delivery in our own area there will be a legal framework for us to continue on. And my laptop has just died. There we are. Happy days. I think with my laptop dying, that's about all I wanted to say. I would refer members to page 103 of the Cabinet Papers, page 13 of the plan. That neatly and nicely sets out the 16 projects in the 3 key areas and gives you a reflection of the width and areas that the projects cover. I think in terms of an introduction, that's as far as I'll go, and I hope Rachel can correct any mistakes that I've made in that introduction.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Perfect as always. So yeah, just in terms of the process that was followed, I just want to reiterate that particularly, we tried to be very inclusive over the summer in alignment with the UK government guidance, a lot of involvement with strategic partners on the formation. We had member seminar to share, if you remember, the long list and the plan prior to then submission in August, and then over August it was then refined and reviewed. And one of the challenges has been to get the projects into a state or a position whereby they can meet the financial parameters that are being set by UK government, which to be fair are quite challenging, because the guidance says there's little movement between financial years. I'd just like to draw also members' attention that within our local investment plan there is also the support of 246,000 for Cardiff Capital Region to lead on some projects on our behalf, of which then our local investment plan very neatly fits into that strategic agenda. And the proposed projects which they'll lead on is cluster development, so that's taking forward the work, such as example on Media Cymru, the fintech work, compound semiconductors, all linked to business innovation, research and development, and sort of like that high-end growth that Cardiff Capital Region have been focusing on. And then also in terms of tourism and promoting and encouraging the region, which again is Destination Torfaen features within this local investment plan and also within the county plan. So we've tried to give that national to local to regional to local synergy. As Councillor Clark has said, it's an ambitious programme, 16 projects with the key impacts. That's what we need to be focusing on.
the benefit that we are doing. I think it's also important to remind members that not all of this, I suppose, is for new projects, is supporting existing EU-funded schemes, which Dave can speak on. So I think he'd want to highlight a particular risk with the recent autumn statement last week and SEF that we are just closely monitoring. So, yeah, the table does outline the whole report, and I'll also allow Dave to speak on Multiply as well, which is the UK Government's adult numeracy programme. We are proposing to keep the 4% back. The report also identifies that Rhondda and TAF will need a percentage of that, which is being worked through. And in the previous report, delegation was given to myself to approve the joint working agreement, or the SLA, when it has been shared. And that is still being worked through because they're still waiting, RCT are waiting for more guidance and clarification from UK government, and that has to come first. So in terms of the way forward, we are aligning this to the emerging PMO that's been established. So we're not duplicating in terms of projects or reporting, but because there will be a far greater monitoring similar to EU funding, you know, they'll also work alongside the PMO in terms of the centralised team. They have to gather the invoices, timesheets, etc., which isn't something the PMO process does. But there will be. We've worked through how that is to work. I'll let Dave also speak about the relationship with RCT on the skills monitoring. We do just have to finalise the local investment plan to turn it into a glossy forward-facing document, and as Councillor Clark has outlined, we tried to align it to the county plan to show that there's synergy and it's all signed up. So really happy to present this to Cabinet today. I should stress that that we are not spending, I suppose, at risk apart from some of Dave's projects, and we are waiting for UK government to come forward with the money before we press go. They always said it would be September, then October, it's now November, and we're still not clear when the decision will be made. And that is something we're still working through, particularly in terms of expenditure or targets that was meant to have incurred this year, this financial year. That's a big challenge now, which obviously every region of the UK is pushing back to UK government on. I'll just quickly hand over to Dave.
Thanks, Rachel. And a couple of points to pick up there then. So one of the risks, I think, and concerns around some of the regional employability work is that, as members will be aware, most, if not all, of the employability work that we deliver in Torfaen is funded externally and largely through European funding currently. And that's delivered on a regional scale. So Torfaen coordinates essentially on behalf of the 6 valleys or authorities for the EU-funded programmes, but also on behalf of the whole city region for the programme called CELT, which was a precursor essentially to Shared Prosperity Fund. So the challenge for us in terms of designing up those that regional approach and that programme when we don't have a decision yet, it is growing. There are difficulties for us to maintain the good work that we've done with partners outside of the local authorities, because we're not yet at the point where we're able to commission them to deliver particular parts of that programme. We're in a relatively fortunate position within Torfaen in that most of the European funded programmes that we've got expire in March or June in terms of some of the overarching monitoring there. But even with the March closure date, if we don't get a decision soon, there will be a period where we may be at risk of not having an employability service to fill that gap. In terms of Multiply, so this is an adult numeracy focused programme. This is additional funding over and above what we receive currently from Welsh Government and others for basic skills and essential skills. As I say, very much focused on numeracy. We're still in discussions with the UK Government as a region as to whether that can be broadened out to consider things beyond numeracy. But at the minute we're working on the assumption that it's not, and we're profiling on that basis. This will be delivered very much in partnership with Coleg Gwent. So there is a Gwent adult learning franchise that delivers our adult and community learning programme, and where we coordinate amongst ourselves around that, and the partners on that partnership are currently designing up how a Multiply intervention will work. So there's a big opportunity there for us to grow the joint working that we do with further education and the third sector in Torfaen. And final point for me is around that working with the third sector. We're really, really mindful from the employability side that there is the provision currently delivered within the employability space beyond that local authorities deliver. And as a region, we're looking at opportunities to do some regional commissioning, of which we would anticipate the third sector coming forward with proposals, but also very much focusing on some local commissioning as well as part of that employability programme, where we know there's gaps in provision that the third sector is better placed to fill. So there will be opportunities for the third sector there as well.
Thank you all. Any questions, colleagues, on this? Obviously, with any scheme like this, it's the first thing I think to say is that expectation management job, isn't it? You want to put something together that's ambitious, but that's also realistic, especially given, as you say, that some of this is work that's already going on that's going to need to be replaced. It's not new money, so to speak. It's just money coming from a different area. And as Richard said, there's the debate about whether that adds up to what we had before or not. And there's also those uncertainties. You know, you mentioned the timing things there. Is it worth having constant reporting back, not only here but elsewhere, just to keep us up to date with how that goes? I don't know. I guess my frustration really is what we need, isn't it? Is a timeline that we know in advance of future economic regeneration funding, so that we can plan things into it for a broader whole, both within these themes and things we want to do. What we seem to have is this very uncertain sort of situation. But I guess we are where we are, and I guess all we can do is really keep talking about things as they develop. Is that a fair assessment of it?
I think it is. I know Rhondda and TAP in particular are having fortnightly meetings with UK government officials who've been, I suppose, they have been quite proactive, and RCT gave us a really good update last week in terms of where we were on all the particular work streams that are going forward. So it is very much now the waiting game in terms of then when UK government are going to say it. I think there was some positive mood music coming from the officials. It's just a case, I think, of the minister signing on the dotted line was the informal feedback that we've been given.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? If not, are we okay to move to the recommendations? Paragraph 8, on page 88 of the report, that we note the draft SPF local investment plan attached and delegate authority to the strategic director, economy, environment, and the leader and/or cabinet member for economy, skills, and regeneration to approve the final version of the plan. Secondly, that we approve the proposed financial allocation to each of the proposed projects and the indicative phasing of funding within the LIP and the principles of how the funding and programme will be managed, as outlined in the report. Thirdly, that we approve the combined SPF and multiply administration fee to be retained and ring-fenced within the economy and environment forward budget for evaluation, monitoring and management of the overall programme. And lastly, that we note the organisations who submitted expressions of interest, including 3 previously funded CRF pilot projects, have been informed they are likely to be taken forward. Are we all okay to agree those? Okay, that's carried. So if we move on then to the report on biodiversity and ecosystems. Mandy.
Thanks, Leader. We're asking today for Cabinet approval to publish the Environmental Wales Act 2016 Section 6 report for 2020-2022. The Act introduced a duty known as Section 6 duty, which requires that public bodies must seek to maintain and enhance biodiversity as far as it is consistent with the proper exercise of their functions and to promote the resilience of ecosystems. Public authorities should seek to embed biodiversity and the resilience of ecosystems into their day-to-day activities and also embed within business planning, projects, programmes, policies and plans. We must publish a report which details the measures taken to comply with Section 6 duty every 3 years. This duty does not only apply to the areas which have an environmental remit, it applies to the whole Council and all of its service areas, and it's also reflected in the Council's Climate and Nature Emergency Action Plan. The report we've been asked to approve today outlines the progress we've made embedding the duty into our Council services. Our officers in the Environment and Street Scene team have prepared the report, and I'll now hand over to our Group Leader, Andrew Osborne, to outline the content of the report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Owen, and good morning, members. So, Councillor Owen has outlined the purpose of the report, but I thought it may be useful for members to put a little bit more detail on this. So, in preparation for the report that's attached as Appendix 1, contributions were sought from a range of council teams with information provided from officers from many services across the council. So, it's been a whole council approach, I think. The report itself is included as Appendix 1, as I say, and it follows a format that was set out by the Welsh Government and requires details of actions set against the 6 objectives of the Wales Nature Recovery Action Plan. So during the period of the report, there was a substantial increase in the understanding and implementation of the Section 6 duty across council services. Policy development and a framework for government has focused on the climate and nature emergency with its support and action plan and recognises the links between carbon storage and the natural environment. Through the Public Services Board, the Green Infrastructure Strategy was adopted with a more detailed assessment being prepared as support and evidence for the emerging replacement local development plan. To recognise the influential role that the local authority plays in managing trees, a detailed Torfaen tree strategy is now in place, covering all aspects of the Council's tree-related responsibilities. And in accordance with national planning policy, the development management teams continue to be proactive in addressing the Section 6 duty within the planning process. Biodiversity enhancements are secured through most planning application decisions. Amendments in the way green space is managed has increased the area of grassland set aside for biodiversity and carbon storage, and specialist cut and collect equipment has been funded through the Welsh Government's Local Places for Nature programme. Members may recall Julie James, Minister for Climate Change, visiting Torfaen earlier in the year to coincide with International Biodiversity Day, and she was able to view the changes that had taken place at the council site near Pontypool. Since 2020, the Local Places for Nature programme has successfully supported a wide range of small-scale, community-based biodiversity improvement projects, including tree and hedgerow planting, wildflower seeding, interpretation, signage, and public awareness. Landscape-scale cross-boundary projects funded by the Welsh Government, such as the South East Wales Resilient Uplands Project, the Resilient Greater Gwent Project, and the Gwent Green Grid Project, are important and examples of recognising that partnership working over a large spatial area has benefits for ecosystem resilience. The provision of up-to-date environmental information available to help project officers manage and comply with the Section 6 duty, has improved over the 3-year period of this report. And to supplement green infrastructure policy development, a GIS layer is a new addition to the information available to council officers on the council system, with also an updated grassland management layer. A service level agreement with the South East Wales Biodiversity Record Centre also provides regular biodiversity information to inform planning decisions within the authority. And finally, with the council developing its new county plan and the creation of a project management office to improve project management across the authority, there is an opportunity to embed the Section 6 duty across a wider range of services, supported by training for council officers. So this morning, we're asking members to approve the draft Section 6 report attached as Appendix 1 that would allow then officers to proceed with Welsh translation of the text and to final formatting and design of a document that then can be published online. And also that Section duty is embedded in the county plan and corporate project management systems with appropriate training provided for officers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Mandy, too. No, it certainly seems this is an important part of embedding the duties and strategies, because all the strategies in the world don't make a difference unless we properly embed them across the council. So that's welcome. And as a council that's declared a climate and biodiversity emergency, I think it's important that we do that so that all our different work streams sort of align around that priority. Any questions, colleagues? are we happy then to approve the recommendation at paragraph 8.1? Thank you to Andrew and to all the officers who've been involved in this work. It really is appreciated. Certainly, you know, personally as someone who enjoys the outdoors and values biodiversity, and also as council leader, just like to thank all the officers involved for their work on this. We are okay to move to the recommendations at paragraph 8.1. It's recommended that Cabinet approves the Section 6 report for publication. Everyone in favour? Great, that's carried. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Mandy. Okay, if we move then lastly to agenda item 12, which is the annual complaints report, and hand over to Peter.
Thank you, Leader. There's two purposes to this report. Firstly, it's an overview of the complaints performance for the financial year 1st of April 2021 to the 31st of March 2022. And secondly, it's for us to formally receive the Public Service Ombudsman annual letter. Two main takeaways from this report. Firstly, during the 2021-22 financial year, there was an increase in complaints into the authority by over 22% compared to the previous financial year. This is a trend that has been noted across authorities as we emerge from the various restrictions that have been in place over the last few years. I would say, if you look at the Public Service Ombudsman report, you'll see there that the number of complaints per 1,000 residents was 0.19%. So you need to take that into perspective. Equally importantly, there was an increase in the number of compliments that were recorded across all service areas, which is a good reflection on our council. By way of reassurance, the information in this report was presented to our Governance and Audit Committee as part of their statutory role in ensuring the Council's complaint procedure is fit for purpose. I and other councillors sit on that committee. Following their review, the committee commented that complaints were being handled very effectively, and training to further outline the processes was requested. I'd like to echo what the Governance and Audit Committee said, and I'd like to compliment our complaints team on their collaborative approach to dealing with complaints. One, they liaise very effectively with all service areas when complaints are received, and they're always looking at ways that we can improve. I'll stop there, and Leader, if I can, I'll hand over to Christopher Corton, who may want to give a little bit more detail. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate that. So I'll just give a bit more of an overview about the contents of the report. So as Councillor Jones says, it's the report for the last financial year. So we had a total of 92 complaints recorded, 71 at stage 1, 3 at stage 2 and 18 via the Public Services Ombudsman. So there was an increase on the previous year, as there was with the compliments, which was up to 112. Besides the complaints, we also dealt with over 1,100 contacts outside of the complaints process, which again is an increase on the 848 from the previous year. Regarding the compliance rate, our target is set at 95% across all of the procedures. During 21-22, we were at 95%, or just over 95% of the stage 1 complaints. Appendix 1 provides more of a detailed breakdown of the complaints by service areas and the lessons learned. As far as benchmarking is concerned, it's been difficult in the past to measure against other authorities, but in the past year, the Complaint Standards Authority has been collating quarterly figures from the authorities, which are now published, and the link is in the report. So it's useful for us then to measure our performance against others and see how they're working. So the team now is currently looking at how we review or record complaints and contacts to make sure that they're accurately captured and reported on. The Ombudsman's annual letter, Appendix 2, as Councillor Jones said, shows that the number of complaints received by the Ombudsman was 18, so that equates to 0.19 per 1,000 residents. So the team has changed, and we are working to obviously continue with the work that we've been doing in the past and continue to build those relationships with other departments and service areas, and learn from the information that's gathered and the intelligence that we're able to seek through the complaints and the contacts they receive. Thank you very much for your time, and welcome any questions.
Thank you, colleagues. Any questions there on the complaints reports? Obviously, something we collect along with the complaints is the service compliments. I think it's a key thing we're often asking about, how we make sure we can portray the examples of where staff go above and beyond the call of duty, to give those staff a credit, especially staff who don't work in things that's often sort of public facing. Anything more you can add about that part of the report?
Yeah, with the compliments, we rely on those to be provided to us by the different service areas. So I suppose it's just putting that information out to them to feed back to us. And we include within the report then figures and sort of the details of the compliments that have been received. So we welcome always that feedback from the service areas in addition to the complaints, because it's an important part of us being able to promote the good as well as the not so good as part of the roles, and people to understand that it is recognised the work that they do, and we are recording that.
Thanks. And you're satisfied that all service areas are working openly and constructively with you and your team?
Yep, definitely. We have good relationships across all service areas, so we have key contacts, but obviously any officers that we need to contact, they always engage with us and very helpful. Obviously we deal with things that we're not experts in, so it's always good that we have those people there that give us the understanding for us to be able to do a comprehensive response.
Peter?
Leader, that came up in the Governance and Audit Committee, and that collaborative approach wasn't recognised.
That's good to hear. Any other questions? If not, the recommendations are at paragraph 8, that we note the information presented in the report and agree to continue to support the Central Complaints and FOI team. Cabinet is invited to provide feedback in relation to the annual letter from the Public Service Ombudsman. Are we all happy? That's agreed. Thank you, and thank you, colleagues. Thanks, everyone, for participating in Cabinet today. Take care.